Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we are decoding a seriously high-stakes geopolitical chessboard, the ongoing military and diplomatic standoff between the US and Iran. We're going to go right past the headlines to look at the tactical pauses, the back-channel whispers, and the true cost of military leverage. But before we even start talking about troops or tactical assets, there's this fascinating, honestly kind of jarring mystery at the center of recent reports. Just how isolated is the United States right now? It turns out this single question is basically driving almost every decision happening in Washington.
Section 1. A coalition of one. The U.S. acts in isolation. So there's a massive departure from traditional modern warfare happening right now. While the U.S. and Israel entered this conflict working closely together, President Trump has explicitly avoided building your traditional coalition of the willing. As the quote goes, it's a coalition of one. The U.S. started this conflict alone, which means, well, they'll likely have to figure out how to end it alone. And this isolation is pretty stark. On one hand, you have the U.S. and Israel locked in active military alignment. But the reaction from Europe and other regional allies? It's been incredibly distant. Despite having deep conversations with the UK, absolutely no hands are being raised across Europe to join the actual fight. It's a bit like showing up to help a friend move but only offering to unpack the boxes after all the heavy lifting is already done. They're offering post-conflict support, for sure, but they are keeping far, far away from the front lines.
Section 2. Splitting the deal. The new proposal from Iran.
Okay, so there's a really fascinating split screen happening in diplomacy right now. While we're hearing all this public language of reconciliation from allied leaders addressing Congress, a very different message is moving through the shadows. Iran has quietly put a brand new offer on the table, and they've routed it entirely through mediators in Pakistan. The core mechanism Iran is attempting to use here is a tactic known as delinking. Basically, it's an attempt to completely separate the volatile, immediate crisis happening in the Strait of Hormuz from the much larger, overarching nuclear question. By splitting these two issues, Iran is trying to force the US into an incredibly tough corner.
And here's the absolute dilemma of that delinking strategy. Historically, the U.S. administration has insisted the nuclear question is the priority, literally the only question in town. But the Strait of Hormuz has evolved into this wildly expensive, uncomfortable side effect that wasn't originally part of the primary war goals. It is bleeding military and financial resources every single day. So the U.S. is forced to ask, do you stop the immediate bleeding right now, or do you hold out for the ultimate prize?
Faced with this really heavy choice, the administration has essentially hit the brakes. Even with hints from officials like Catherine Leavitt that a response is coming soon, the sheer financial and strategic cost of escalation means nobody in Washington is rushing blindly forward. They're taking a calculated, very delicate pause to figure out if splitting this deal actually serves their long-term interests.
Section 3. The nuclear leverage. Iran's harsh lesson and next moves.
You see, Iran has internalized a very harsh geopolitical lesson from this entire standoff. The reality is, if they had already possessed a fully developed nuclear weapon before this all began, the US likely would have been completely deterred from military action. History has proven time and again that nuclear-armed nations are rarely subjected to direct military invasions. Because they learned this lesson the hard way, imagining Iran showing any foundational flexibility on their nuclear program is, well, it's incredibly difficult.
So if giving up their nuclear capabilities is completely a no-go, what can Iran actually offer to make a straight-only deal work? Experts point to what they call gestural concessions. This means minor, totally reversible moves, like maybe allowing more international monitoring or offering brief temporary pauses in enrichment. It's just enough to relieve the immediate pressure without giving up their ultimate leverage.
Because the reality is stark. They are not going to take nuclear enrichment off the table. They will absolutely not permanently dismantle what President Trump has referred to as the nuclear dust. That capability, that's their insurance policy for survival. Any deal accepted right now will almost certainly leave Iran's broader nuclear ambitions completely intact.
Section 4. Who speaks for Iran? The reality of military tactics and leadership. Now, if diplomacy fails and military escalation actually happens, it's expected to follow a very specific split playbook. The US will conservatively focus its firepower entirely on neutralizing capabilities. We're talking taking out naval assets, military infrastructure, and drone facilities. Meanwhile, they essentially clear the lane for Israel to handle the other half, which is actively targeting high-level personnel and Iranian leadership.
But here is where this entire multi-layered strategy hits a massive brick wall. Targeting leadership, or even just verifying if that Pakistani-mediated proposal is actually legitimate, is complicated by a staggering intelligence gap. As Secretary of State Marco Rubio highlighted recently, it's not even clear who speaks for the regime.
The Trump administration's signature approach is playing all these cards at the exact same time. Heavy military pressure, crippling economic sanctions, and calculated diplomatic pauses. But executing this three-dimensional chess game requires flawless precision. And it's practically impossible to apply exactly the right amount of pressure when you don't actually know who is calling the shots on the other side.
Which leaves us with this really provocative reality. With a new Ayatollah in place and highly opaque, competing factions battling it out in the shadows of Tehran, a massive strategic question remains. How do you successfully negotiate a high-stakes, multi-layered deal or effectively calibrate the threats of war when you aren't even sure who truly holds the pen to sign the agreement? Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and keep questioning the narratives behind the news.